and improved buy, sell, keep, avoid is back for Game Week 6. Welcome to FPL Mate, my name is Dan, and today we're going to be having a look at all of those big transfer trends that you should and should not be jumping on. Let's get going. Before we get started, the latest episode of the Stick to FPL podcast is now live on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, everything you want, wherever you want to watch it, it is up right now. And it's a wildcard special, so if you're thinking about wildcarding, or maybe you've even hit the button already, that video is definitely going to help you out. So go check it out, search Stick to FPL wherever you want to, or just use the link at the top of the description. So this week we have made yet more improvements to the Buy, Sell, Keep, Avoid series, as you guys give more feedback on the new format. This week we are going to be including goalkeepers, which are going to come at the end of the video, but it's going to work generally the way it usually does, where we will tier list players based on whether they are buys, sells, keeps, or avoids. Now, first of all, we're going to be having a look at this big section, which is the keeps and the sells, and this is going to be about players that you possibly already own. So we're going to go through some players who are being sold by people and kind of figure out whether you should actually keep them or sell them. And we're starting off here, as you can see, with a few players that I think should be kept. Yes, there are people out there selling Solanke, Watkins, and Havertz, but I definitely would be looking to keep all three. Havertz should hopefully be playing in the central striker position for this game week. With Trossard, he is going to be playing, playing his ban, I guess, in the Carabao Cup, so that's going to be useful for him. As for Watkins, I think he's kind of an optional sell. You could maybe sell him if you really needed to free up some budget. If you're on a wild card, I would understand it, but in general, with Ipswich up next and Watkins' form improving week on week, he would be a player that I would like to keep ideally. And Solanke is at the top here as my #1 keep for the game week. Really like this pick. He's only played 3 games so far this season, but has already generated over 2 XG. And this is because the Ange Postecoglou Spurs sides really favour the strikers. We saw this last season with Richarlison and Son. Whenever they played in the central striker position, there was just so many chances for them to get goals. And that's exactly what Solanke is going to do, moving on to some okay fixtures in the next 2 against Man United and Brighton, but after that, West Ham, Palace, the fixtures do look really good. So I think if you have kept on to Solanke, I would continue to hold on to him because he's looking pretty good moving forward. The numbers are there, the fixtures are there to a degree as well, and I could say the same about all 3 of these keep players. Now, there's 4 players that you could maybe keep or maybe sell depending on how strongly you feel about them, and a lot of them is down to fixtures. So Calvert-Lewin, I would monitor him at the moment. If you do have him, he is very close to being a keep. In general, you probably would keep him, but I also understand if you would want to switch to another 6 million-ish forward. We will get to the forward buys very, very shortly. Don't you worry, guys. But yeah, he's close to being a keep. But as for players like Welbeck, Vardy, and João Pedro, all having difficult away fixtures next. Chelsea have been improved defensively. Vardy against Arsenal, obviously that is a difficult fixture for any forward. So I would kind of understand if you did want to sell these. Now, ideally, you would keep them and maybe bench them for this game week. If you can bench them, that's going to be great. But if you don't have any other options, maybe moving some of these players to an alternative forward might work out quite well for you. Interesting note on João Pedro, by the way, guys. It has been reported that he could be injured. He was spotted leaving the stadium against Forest on crutches. And then, well, we saw a picture on Instagram where there was crutches in the picture. So were they João Pedro's crutches? Has he injured his ankle during a very tough looking challenge in that Forest game towards the end of the game? There is a good chance that he is going to be injured. So one to keep an eye on, guys, before, I guess, keeping or selling João Pedro. It might be that he needs to be sold if you can't just bench him for this week. And finally, our sells. Isak is unfortunately just not putting up the numbers to justify his price tag. He really, really isn't. And with Man City up next, it's a really good opportunity to jump off Isak. So I would recommend him as a sell. It's not just the fixture, it's not just the price. Like I say, the numbers just aren't quite there. 1.41 XG in 5 full games for a player like this is just not quite good enough. We know he is carrying a small injury at the moment as well. So maybe it's going to take some time for him to get his form back. I'm sure we will speak about Isak again later on in the season, but for now, he is a sell. Muniz is also going to be a sell. I know he got that assist off the bench in game week 5, but if you guys saw it, you would understand the ball just bounced off him and landed in the path of, I believe, Adama Traore, who finished off the goal. So it really wasn't a skillful assist. He didn't know anything about it, and it does look like Jimenez, with his continued goal-scoring form, now 2-2 in his starts. I think Muniz is probably going to remain on the bench until Jimenez really drops a poor performance, but that hasn't happened yet, so Muniz very much in trouble. Don't really like the next 2 fixtures for him either. Forest away is proving a difficult fixture for teams. And finally, Wissa, an obvious sell given the fact that he is going to be injured for around 6 to 7 weeks from this point, so not looking too good there. So a few midfielders to consider keeping would be Eze, Palmer and Diogo Jota. I don't think these players are automatic sells, and I know that might sound a bit controversial, as I'm sure, you know, there are other options out there. We're looking at Mbermo, we're looking at Luis Diaz, which we will get to, and obviously these players are turning some heads, but I have a look at these players, and honestly, there's not really too much wrong with them going forward. Obviously, Eze is very much seen as a disappointing player, but I said this on the podcast that has been uploaded today. If you didn't own Eze right now, you wouldn't see him as a disappointment because he hasn't disappointed you. What you would see is that he's had a goal disallowed, possibly on penalties moving forward. That obviously he didn't take that last penalty, but on another occasion, because he's got penalty share, he might take a different penalty. You know, he could have scored twice against Manchester United in game week 5. And there's been a couple of very small margins, fine margins really, where if just one of them was slightly different, and there exists universes out there in which they are different, well, we'd be having very different conversations about Eze right now, because he is showing potential, and he is not a player like, you know, maybe Darwin Nunez, for example, maybe Nicholas Jackson, who is known for underperforming. So no matter how many shots they take and no matter how many chances they get, they're always going to be slightly below those numbers. Eze isn't that player. He's a career overperformer. So it's actually quite unusual for a player to get this many chances and not score goals. And I think it's more of an anomaly from a small 5-game sample size than a new truth. And obviously people will say, well, Crystal Palace, they are disappointing in general, but despite that, they are still creating chances for Eze because he's got 2.11 XG. He's taken 20 shots. That's the second most of any midfielder in the Premier League so far. So in many ways, there's lots of positivity to be taken from Eze. Everton is the next fixture, which is pretty nice. After that, Liverpool and Forest, we can kind of have this discussion again. But I would say that if Eze performs against Everton, and I think that's very possible, we might be looking at him in very different ways. Like I say, one small difference for Eze, we're going to look at him very differently. So I don't think he is a player that you have to sell, particularly not this game week in this particular fixture. Cole Palmer is a player I would probably keep as well. Some people looking to make the switch to Saka. I understand the reasoning behind that, but Palmer's done nothing wrong really so far. So still think he is worth holding on to. And Diogo Jota, he is going to be a problem player at some point. And maybe you could say, well, he was a problem player in game week 5 because he didn't get any minutes. But often we see when a player is rotated, when a player is rested, that's actually a positive sign for their minutes moving forward. So because Jota did get that rest in game week 5, I think his chances of playing in game week 6 have actually increased. And therefore, against Wolves, I don't think there's anything wrong with this fixture. If you do prefer like an Mbermo and you really desperately want to get an Mbermo or a Luis Diaz into your team and selling Eze or Jota is the only way for you to do that, then that is a reason to sell them. If you're on a wild card, that is a reason to sell them. But in general, I don't think these players are must-sells at all. Now, Salah, on the other hand, arguably could be a sell. Now, he's not in the sell category. He's kind of somewhere in the middle here because I think mostly for 12.8 million, that is just too much money to spend on a player you're never going to captain, really, over the next 10 game weeks. Because Haaland, you're going to captain him very frequently. You probably prefer to captain Saka or Palmer, maybe even Watkins in certain game weeks as well. There's not really too many captain opportunities for Salah. And if, well, not any opportunities that are stronger than some of his, other players, other players in FPL, particularly when we get to the likes of Chelsea and Arsenal in game weeks 8 and 9. So is he good value for money if you're not going to captain him? No, he's not. Neither is Haaland. These super expensive players are only good value for money if you're going to captain them. That's where they make up their value. Otherwise, dropping a Salah down to Saka might help you to really improve your team elsewhere. Get a Trent Alexander-Arnold in, or a Saka, or maybe some Havertz in the forward position. You can really use that budget quite effectively. So that's why he's slightly below the keeps, in my opinion. Kaoru Mitoma has a difficult fixture against Chelsea up next. Madueke has been disappointing since his hat-trick. It was a bit of an anomaly, but we probably saw that one coming, to be honest. So yeah, would be looking to monitor him. Not a definite sell, but you could potentially sell him. De Bruyne, I think he'll probably will be available for the next game. We don't know that for sure, but in general, I just don't think he is a great value for money pick either. A lot of the other kind of midfielders around that 10 million mark, I would be kind of preferring to go for Saka, for example. And I think De Bruyne to Saka could be a really nice move if you can afford to make it. And a couple of sells here as well. Onana up next, Ipswich, but it doesn't matter. He's a defensive midfielder, and although he has scored goals this season, it doesn't seem sustainable, and we've kind of seen that over the last couple of game weeks. Actually substituted at half-time as well, we saw recently, so that is a bit of a concern there. Gordon with the difficult fixture against City, and not offering too much, really. Kind of disappointing, another disappointing player there, not putting up the same numbers as a lot of the other players around his price. Gordon is definitely a player I would be looking to sell to, and Burmo, for example. I think that's a really nice move. And Bruno Fernandes, similar situation to Eze, but I think because his numbers are slightly worse than Eze, and he is quite a bit more expensive, he is another one of those players who I think you just maybe cut loose at this point. But maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's harsh me putting Eze in keep and Fernandes in sell, but I think the difference in price, you can do a lot with 1.4 million in the world of FPL. So for that reason, I have dropped Fernandes a little bit lower there. And also, I think the fixtures in the next fixture is more difficult for Fernandes than Eze against Everton. But I imagine next game week, they might swap in positions. Let's see. So really simple on the defenders to keep. Trent, you have to keep him. Best defender in the game. Pedro Porro, I know people have been disappointed with him recently, but his attacking attributes have been very, very nice indeed. Super creative. A little bit of goal threat there as well. It's really, really useful. And the fixtures, I think, coming up are quite nice for Spurs as well. Underrated run of fixtures here, and I think we should start looking at some Spurs players potentially here. Gvardiol is another player I'd like to include in the keep section. I think he should play most games for Man City, and I was looking up the clean sheet projections over the next kind of 6 game weeks, and it actually seems that Man City have a higher clean sheet projection than Arsenal do over the next 6. I think that's partially due to the fact that the Arsenal do have Liverpool and Chelsea in 9 and 10, but still, up until maybe game week 12, I think a Man City defender can still be very useful to you. We'll move on to the monitors here. Saliba is one to monitor. I don't think he's worth switching out. If you have him, you probably stick with him, despite the fact he has no attacking threat whatsoever. I guess if you were on a wild card, you would go for Gabriel instead. But there's nothing wrong with Saliba here either. Maybe even worth, if you wanted to triple up on defense, then Saliba would be part of that 3, I would imagine. Maybe you go for Raya, Gabriel, Timber. Raya, Gabriel, Saliba, either one works. Lewis is one to monitor. I think he can still get some minutes moving forward, and if he does, he's really good value for money, Man City defender. I think he does offer some goal threat there as well, and some attacking threat. So does Gvardiol, by the way, guys. Gvardiol, his attacking numbers are looking better and better each week. Robinson is a player to monitor. Next fixture is okay, but it does start to get more difficult for Fulham after that, so maybe hold on to him for one more week. And Mykolenko, previously probably a sell, but now he's most likely recovered from his illness. Looking forward, I don't know, maybe Everton can see some more clean sheets in some favourable fixtures. So I don't think Mykolenko is a sell anymore. I think he's moved into the monitor section. As for your sells, Romero, don't fully trust the Spurs defence, and I prefer a Pedro Porro for the attacking attributes. I'm not sure I would want to spend 5.1 million on a Spurs centre-back. I'd be more keen on the full-backs there. Lewis Dunk is another player who just has poor fixtures going forward. Chelsea, Spurs and Newcastle, I can't see any clean sheets there for Brighton, so he might be a player to cut loose. And as for Newcastle, even if they didn't have that Man City fixture up next, they've just been so poor defensively, and there's not really an excuse because they have had good fixtures and still have not been keeping clean sheets outside of what seemed like a bit of a freak clean sheet in game week 1 against Southampton. But let's move on to our buys and our avoids. But before we do, make sure you have dropped a like if you haven't done already, and do subscribe if you want more buy, sell, keep, avoid videos every single game week. We do this every week, so yeah, hopefully going to help you guys out. Of course, all feedback welcome on the series as we look to improve it week on week. Forwards to buy, Haaland, very, very obvious, probably your best captain option for this Newcastle fixture, given that Newcastle have been quite poor. But we've got Solanke here as well. I really do like him as a potential forward buy as well with these fixtures, and they get better and better for Spurs as well. We mentioned about Solanke's numbers earlier on in the video, so not only is he a player I would keep if you already had him, but if you don't have Solanke, he would definitely be a player I would be looking at bringing in this week. If you're selling Isak, for example, I think Solanke makes a really nice replacement there. You could go for Wood as well if you wanted to drop down to an even cheaper player. I think that works well as well. So we've got Wood in here as a 6.1 million option. Decent fixtures in general: Fulham, Crystal Palace and Leicester in the next 4, which is quite nice. He's now been confirmed as the penalty taker for Nottingham Forest, which is brilliant news, and he's just a very reliable guy. 3 goals now in 5 games. He was reliable all season last season as well. Really, really do like this pick. Now, the monitor section for the forwards is a little bit more difficult because I think, depending on your preference, you could put any of these players in the buy section as well. So, you know, take this with a bit of a grain of salt. For me, I prefer Solanke to Jackson. I just trust Solanke more. I trust Solanke's minutes more. I trust him as, I believe he is a higher quality player, and I think he has, he's going to have better opportunities for goals. Yes, Jackson, maybe you would say, has the better form, having just scored 2 goals, but Solanke did also score last game week, and it's very clear that, you know, per start, I suppose, Solanke's numbers are right up there and are only going to improve as he beds in further to this Spurs system. Jackson, don't get me wrong though, I do really like him as well, and I think this is a preference thing. I prefer Solanke, someone else might prefer Jackson, and that's absolutely fine too. Similar to Calvert-Lewin versus Wood, I think some people would prefer Wood, some people would prefer Calvert-Lewin. I don't fully trust Everton as an attack in general, so even with these great fixtures, even with Calvert-Lewin on penalties, I'm not super convinced by Calvert-Lewin. I'm a little bit worried about his injury record as well. So that's why he's in monitor for me, but some of you guys might feel differently. Remember, my tier listing is just about my opinions, but we include all of the stats and the fixtures on screen, so you guys can make your own decisions as well if you do disagree. And please feel free to let me know in the comments as well if you do disagree with anything. Watkins, just because of his price, I've put him in monitor. I don't know if I would buy him necessarily. If I had him already, I would probably keep him. But he's quite a difficult player to get to if you don't have him already. And Havertz also in the monitor section. And I think this is going to be kind of coming down to, do you prefer to buy Arsenal defenders or attackers? If you're going for an attacker, you're going for Saka. If you're going for defenders, you're going for Raya or maybe Gabriel. Where does Havertz fit in all of this? He could go in place of one of Raya and Gabriel potentially, but he's certainly not a must-buy necessarily. But definitely an interesting option and a good option for the next 2 fixtures against Leicester and Southampton, particularly if he continues to play in the forward position. Welbeck I would avoid given the fixture against Chelsea. If you already have him, like I mentioned, you can maybe bench him. Similar situation with Vardy and Duran, just because of the minutes issue. I wish Duran would become a regular starter for Aston Villa because I would love to buy him. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be a starter right now, and as such, it's very, very difficult to recommend him if the minutes aren't quite there. I think other 6 million forwards like Calvert-Lewin and Wood are just going to do a better job right now. Saka is our top midfield buy. If you're looking for a new midfielder to buy and you don't have him already, Saka is super obvious for the next 2 fixtures. Some people will even say Saka is a captain option against Leicester and Southampton. Well, maybe Haaland has something to say about that one. But a great thing about Saka is that even if you don't have a player like Gabriel, for the corner headers? Well, you've still got the corner taker right here in Saka, which is going to be really, really nice, particularly when Ødegaard is out and Saka has basically, jurisdiction over that, well, one of the sides for the corner, and Rice may be taken on the other side. But it's still very, very useful indeed to get access to the Gabriel points as well, I guess. So, yeah, obviously, penalty taker, his attacking numbers aren't insane, but we know the quality of the player and we know the quality of the fixtures, so we do have a lot of faith in Saka going into the next 2 game weeks. Definitely a player I would want to own. He's just the best Arsenal attacker to have for these great fixtures where, if these games are 4-0, 5-0, and you definitely see that as a possibility, then Saka is going to most likely be the top scoring player in those games. And Burmo is another great buy for this game week, turning it on against Spurs with that goal. He's been scoring a few goals this season so far, 4 goals already for him. And the next fixtures are great. West Ham and Wolves, both at home, really nice fixtures here. Nailed on, 90-minute man, penalty taker, set piece taker. He has everything. And the great fixtures go on for, I think 11 game weeks of great fixtures for Mbeumo. And because he is so reliable, you could just buy him now, and that position is just done, sorted for the next 11 game weeks, and you could focus your transfers on other areas of the pitch. And I love that for a glue guy, a pick who just brings your team together a little bit there. And we've got Semenyo here as well as a buy. If you're looking for that cheap option, he is the guy I'd go for. Great fixtures in the next 2, the reverse of the Arsenal fixtures. So we've got Southampton in 6 and Leicester in 7. We know by now that Semenyo is a shots monster, kind of like me in my university days. Shout out to the person who commented that on the video the other day. And because he's taking so many shots, because he is the danger man for a strong Bournemouth side, you do imagine he will be involved in the returns over the next 2 game weeks. One warning with Semenyo is that if you do have him, make sure you've got someone like maybe Rodgers on your bench who you can rotate with him, because the fixtures are a little tougher in game week 8, for example, against Arsenal. We've got some monitors next. Luis Diaz, who I'm not totally convinced by because I think he is a minutes risk going forward. I think Jota and in particular Gakpo could take some minutes from him. We've seen Jota rested. Maybe it's Diaz's turn next in the Premier League. So be aware of that one. But at the same time, his form is fantastic. He's playing with confidence. He is playing selfishly. And his numbers are fantastic as well. The fixtures are still there for Liverpool over the next 2 game weeks. And for all of the reasons above, I still think Luis Diaz is very close to being a buy. After that, we've got players like Smith Rowe. Don't love the fixtures over the next 2 for Smith Rowe, but you could still maybe play him if you already have him. He's not a player I would sell, but I'm not 100% sure if I would buy him either. Do prefer Semenyo if you're looking for a player in that kind of price range. Rodgers is always going to be a player that we're monitoring if we don't have him already. Really nice value for money there. And Cole Palmer, if you don't have him, monitor him. I think he is going to have a part to play in our FPL teams soon. If you already have him, great. If you don't, maybe now is not the time, because we do prefer someone like Saka. And for some avoids, McNeil is going to be controversial, I know. I know a lot of people really like him, but he's just basically not really shooting. He has the creative numbers. A lot of that is through, maybe taking a lot of set pieces, playing balls through kind of through the middle areas. But like I said earlier, I don't really trust Everton for goals. And I know they've been good for goals the first few game weeks, but they're also conceding a lot of goals and losing games. So I wonder if Everton may change up their tactics. I mean, we maybe even saw that against Leicester, where they weren't creating as much. They were more defensively solid. And I think that kind of favours the Everton defenders, but maybe not the attackers so much. So I wonder if we're going to start to see a trend there. I'm not sure. Let me know what you think about McNeil, because I know a lot of people like him for his creativity, of which he has loads, don't get me wrong, but can we trust Everton to score enough goals to justify him? I guess he is really cheap, so there is that going for him. But again, prefer Smith Rowe, prefer Semenyo, prefer Rodgers, so where does McNeil come into this? Sancho is going to be an avoid as well. Still rotation risk. Not even had enough minutes in a game to get 2 points in FPL, I suppose. He is going to continue to be rotation risk. Creating a little bit, but has massively overperformed on his assists and yet to generate any XG as well, which is worrying. Harvey Barnes, difficult fixture up next. A little bit of rotation risk. Would not look to buy him either. Right, defenders. Trent is still your top buy. I even put him above Gabriel. Gabriel is going to be in here, though. He is, another player really dangerous from the set pieces. We know this by now. Next 2 game weeks is going to be big for Gabriel. If you can get him, there's probably good reason to go for him at this point. And Pedro Porro, we spoke about him earlier. Bit of a differential. More people selling him than buying him. I actually think he's a pretty decent player to buy. Couple of 4.5 million defenders in the monitor section. And I have to admit, the cheaper defenders are not filling me with confidence right now. But if I had to go anywhere, it would probably be these 2, to be fair. Aina and Nottingham Forest putting up really good defensive numbers. They're the 3rd best defence in the Premier League according to those underlying numbers, which kind of puts them in the same area as the likes of Liverpool and Man City, who are topping the charts at the moment. Colwill and Chelsea also looking pretty good defensively, much better than last season so far, and the next 2 fixtures look good for him as well. Saliba's one to monitor. We do prefer Gabriel, we do prefer Raya, we maybe even prefer Timber, but he is a player who could come into consideration if you're tripling up on the Arsenal defence. And Konate, another player to monitor. Not super keen on this one because it does lock you out of other Liverpool triple ups that could be more effective. And in a couple of weeks, the fixtures do turn a little bit. And if you're spending 5.1 million on a defender, really you want to play them every single game week. I would not want to play a Konate against a Chelsea or an Arsenal in the same way as I might with a Trent, who will offer attacking threat in those games as well. Konate doesn't really have that to his game as much. I'm going to put Consta in a void if you don't have him already. If you do have him, you keep him and you probably play him. But massively bailed out last game week with that goal. And by the way, Consta is not a goal scorer. He is super rare. He scores a goal. He's like a 1 goal per season guy, and he's already scored that 1 goal this season. But in general, I just don't trust the Aston Villa defence right now. I think clean sheet against Ipswich is possible, but after that, Man United, Fulham and Bournemouth, I'm not expecting clean sheets in any of those games, particularly as there's a lot of really tough Champions League games coming up for Aston Villa as well. So that's going to get tough for them. Lewis, because of that rotation risk, if you don't already have him, I wouldn't look to buy him. And Mazraoui, 2 difficult fixtures against Spurs and Aston Villa, where I expect United to concede. And after that, we might start getting some rotation for Mazraoui. So he's definitely not a player I would be looking to invest in right now. But let me know what you think about all of these picks. Did I get anything wrong? Give your opinions. I would love to hear them. Do make sure you drop a like if you have enjoyed this one. And subscribe if you're new around here. I will see you tomorrow for an expert-related video. And I'll see you later, mates. Bye-bye.